On this James the Bike Guy, we're taking a look at the brand new RockShox SID SL Ultimate. This is the new lightweight cross-country race fork from RockShox, and this one's even just a little bit nicer than the typical one because this is the RockShox SID SL Ultimate with the new position-sensitive brain from Specialized. So we're going to pop this out of the package, check out all about this fork and the standard RockShox SID SL Ultimate. But before we get this out of the box, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below. That way you can see more videos like this into the future. So the RockShox SID has been around for a ton of years, and it's always been placed as the highest performing cross-country race fork in RockShox lineup. And this brand new SID SL Ultimate is no different. But what RockShox has done for this year is they've added even more lightweight and even more performance out of their SID series to make these things the next level of performance. You know, for years they tested out a fork called the RS1, and then other brands like Fox have come out with the Fox 32 Stepcast Factory Edition that have started to really push this category. And this new SID SL Ultimate really takes that on. Now, when we look at this, SID is the cross-country series, and Ultimate is the nicest in the lineup. Now, the neat thing with the SID SL Ultimate is the SL indicates that this is the super light version of the fork. So for the first time, they're actually doing two different chassis styles with the RockShox SID. So the standard SID Ultimate actually now goes to a 35mm stanchion to make the fork as stiff as an enduro fork, but still really lightweight. And then they've gone in and they've made this SL version, which is more similar to the outgoing SID World Cup. And this is going to run a 32mm stanchion, and it's also going to be pretty narrow. So if you take a look, this is a little bit narrower than some of the other forks. And, you know, that takes a cue from the same way that, that Fox did on their Stepcast. But the neat thing with this particular fork is it's still going to run clearance for a 2.4-inch tire. It's going to have these very svelte lowers, and you'll see that there's a little bit of a cutout inside of the fork lower to be able to fit the nice wide boost hubs. Now this fork does run a Maxle, which is a 15 by 110mm through axle. It's got this flat end cap that works with a 6mm Allen key. And the neat thing is this is going to be a post-mount brake setup running a minimum of a 160mm rotor, but you can actually go as large as a 200mm rotor on this fork. So it's going to have a lot of capability inside of this fork. Another neat thing to mention is I like the new connector that they've done for the cabling on the front. So if you take a look at that, you'll notice that that's actually now a clip rather than a spot where you have to run a zip tie. If we take a look at the uppers here, you'll notice we've got these 32mm straight-walled aluminum stanchions in a nice fast black coating. And you'll also see that the crown of the fork is actually aluminum. Now this is different than the outgoing World Cup fork, which actually ran a carbon crown here. And it's interesting they've gone that way, but I believe they've done it because it can be just as strong, but actually even lighter than the carbon setup because it doesn't have to be quite as oversized. That's really interesting to mention because even though this new fork has even more capability than the old one, RockShox claims that this should come in about 166 grams lighter than the outgoing World Cup. Continuing up the upper here, you'll notice that the steerer is going to be aluminum. It's actually pretty thin. If you take a look, this is one of the thinner steerers that I've seen in a while, but the outside dimensions are still 1 1/8 to 1.5 inches, so this is going to fit with pretty much any cross-country race frame that you might be mounting this fork onto. If we start talking about the goods that are inside of here, let's start with our air chamber. So the air chamber on this is actually going to be a Deb-on-Air air spring. So the Deb-on-Air air spring is really neat because this is going to be specifically tuned for a cross-country setup. But the neat thing with that is it's actually still going to be able to run air tokens. So you can put in air tokens inside of here to be able to adjust the ramp and basically the way that the air spring functions inside of there, so you can make it more responsive at low hits, make sure that it ramps up as you're going through travel, and really dial that in. But I also like that this particular fork is of course going to come with the markings to help be able to set up sag. Now, neat thing to mention that I didn't earlier is on the SL version of the SID, this fork is only going to be in 100mm format. Because it's a super light race fork, they're not expecting it to go longer. The standard SID Ultimate with those 35mm stanchions has a range so that you can adjust internally. This fork will always be 100mm of travel. It does have those markings, which makes it nice to set up. And a neat thing that I like about the actual top where you put the air in, so it's of course a Schrader valve, but you'll notice that that mount is screwed on using a standard cassette lock ring tool. And that's because since you can adjust the air tokens inside, it's a great idea to be able to easily pull that off, return it to place, and be able to set up the internal just the way that you want. Adjusting that air spring with those air tokens doesn't require you to rebuild or take apart the fork really, so that might be something that you do based on race day conditions or just setting your bike up for the next event. Now the next thing we should talk about is the damping unit. So the damping unit on this particular fork is the brain, and we'll get to that in a moment. But I want to talk about on the standard SL, what would be inside of here is the brand new Charger Race Day damper. So the Charger Race Day damper is an ultra lightweight version of the Charger 2.1 that's in the newer Ultimate forks such as the Pike. And that new damper unit has some really great control over small and large bump compliance. And it's also going to be one of their lightest that they've set up. It actually runs a bladder on the inside that runs just a little bit of fluid helping save weight, but it still controls the damping really well. And they use a special fluid called the Maxima Plush damping fluid, which goes inside. It's a little lighter and it also helps quiet down the fork, because sometimes when you get these really light forks, they make a little bit of noise. Now, in this particular one, it goes even a step further. What we have here is actually the brain from Specialized. So if you don't know what a Specialized brain is, basically it's an inertia valve system. It's something that came up many years ago in Specialized lineups. They've run it on rear shocks for years, and in the past few years they've started to run it on front forks as well. What the brain does is it allows the fork damper unit to differentiate bumps coming from below and pressure coming down from the top. And what that allows for is that the fork can essentially lock out on its own thousands of times across a ride, so that you get the performance and the efficiency of a rigid bike, but it also has the control and the stability of a suspension bike. And that's because when you're just pressing down on the fork, it's going to be locked out. And if you get a bump from below, it instantaneously opens, and that inertia valve allows the shock to work just like it should. The neat thing for this year, though, is a new technology in this brain called the position sensitive brain. And what that allows for is the brain system now has an initial portion of travel that can be set up so that the fork is really efficient over small bumps, soaking everything in, because the first beginning portion of the travel is going to allow the fork to be active, and then it's going to hit the platform for the brain. They come with 15 millimeters of initial travel, and you'll see in this video, as I press down on the fork, it's actually got some give, but as soon as it hits that platform, you see I can't press it down anymore. Unless I give a little tap to the bottom of the fork, now the inertia valve is opened up and you see that it can actually press through further. The brains do have an adjustment, so you can dial it in when you're out on the trail. It's called a brain fade, and basically it changes the sensitivity of that inertia valve. So all the way down here, it's going to be set up full firm. So that's going to make this the least responsive to small bump compliance and require the most amount of a bump to actually open it up. And then you can slide it all the way open, and there's small detents in between, so you can set it wherever you want. And that's actually going to make it really active and pretty supple. Another neat thing is you actually have rebound adjust up on the top, which is pretty neat. In a lot of setups, this has to go down on the bottom of the fork, but I like to see that that's all integrated in the top of the fork. And that's a look at this new fork. So let's go ahead and find out what this really crazy new fork from RockShox actually weighs. So the actual weight of the SID SL Ultimate is going to come in at 1,467 grams. And that is absolutely incredible for a fork like this. I should mention that this particular fork with the brain damping unit is always going to come in a little bit heavier than the Charger Race Day damper unit, just because it has more metal and stuff going on to make the inertia valve work. But that 1,467 grams is still pretty dang amazing. So thanks for watching this video on the RockShox SID SL Ultimate. Go ahead and let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Can't wait to know what you think about this fork. Let me know what you think about the whole Ultimate lineup, and what bike would you love to see this thing on? It's a really incredible fork, and I can't wait for its new owner to enjoy it.